Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, as always, for joining us for Coffee with Coker. It is our March edition. And before we get started, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping tips with you. Immediately following today's presentation, we will have a question and answer period. So please feel free to submit your questions in the area provided in the GoToMeeting dashboard, and we will address them as they come in or at the end of the presentation. As you exit the webinar, we will also provide a brief survey, and we would greatly appreciate your providing your feedback on this presentation, as well as provide us with suggestions for future topics. The participant phone line will be muted for today's presentation, and a recording of today's session will be emailed to you after the conclusion of the session. Leading today's discussion on the new ambulatory care model is Jeff Gorky, who leads our practice management services team. With more than 25 years of experience in the healthcare arena, Jeff focuses on both strategic and operational issues in order to drive efficiencies and improve profitability. Working with both large and small health systems, privately held physician groups, and employed physician networks, he has a successful track record in designing, operationalizing, and implementing strategic initiatives to improve overall performance. In today's presentation, Jeff will provide insight into the micro and macro dynamics of the employed ambulatory enterprise as you prepare your physicians for what's next on the horizon. Please join me in welcoming Jeff Gorky.
Thanks, Sue, and thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate you all dedicating your time to joining us on this spring day, and hopefully it's sunny and nice wherever you may be. Wanted to cover quickly, the presentation today is going to be fairly long in content, so I'm going to try to move rapidly and be as detailed as I can as we go through the presentation. The objectives for today Sue had covered, and basically what I'd like to do is look at where the ambulatory model is right now and get a sense of where the ambulatory model is moving forward based on quality initiatives, compensation changes for physicians, the change in reimbursement paradigm, and things of that nature. We have a couple of polling questions that I'd like to ask you all to address so that I can get a better sense of the audience. If you wouldn't mind filling those in as we move along, I'd greatly appreciate it. The current state of the health system right now, the employed models are undergoing a great deal of change. The entire macro environment is undergoing a great deal of change. So this slide basically depicts for you prospects of where your system is presently. Are you experiencing positive margins? Are you about break even? Are you in negative margins? And this applies primarily to the employed model, so that's the direction we're going to go with this. Most of the health systems are generally running a deficit on their employed model, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. What the subsidy is, how great or small the subsidy is, and where systems are with regard to that. We'll go into the makeup of the subsidy a little bit as well. So as we look at the macro market, just the general market across the board, the motivators, as you all know, is basically simple economics. Hospitals, in many instances, are still acquiring practices, and we'll talk a little bit later about the shift in that I see coming down the road. And the national healthcare drivers essentially are increasing expenses for systems, increasing expenses for physicians, reduced compensation across the board for both, healthcare IT demands, increasing staff costs, practice management headaches, and then again, it's the reimbursement pressure. What does this all translate into? Basically, translates into systems and physicians trying to do more with less. The systems continue to look at physicians in many instances as the answer to solving the alignment paradigm, and by doing it with employment models. We'll talk a little bit more later about some of the changes in that dynamic, specifically relative to acquiring physicians or aligning with them. What this means for the market generally, when the health systems acquire the practices, it's obviously with the best intentions. Been involved in many of those deals, both on the physician side and the hospital side, and have dealt in many instances with the post-traumatic merger and acquisition process. The good things that can happen in these mergers, obviously, are educated systems that actually understand physicians and how physician practices run. The relationship between the providers and the hospitals is one that enhances the delivery of care and helps better coordinate care. There's better management of specialty patient service lines. There's obviously an attempt to gain quality. There's some contracting leverage, and there's financial incentive for the better management of care. The challenges, of course, and I've seen this quite frequently, systems don't understand the hospital or the practices and the physicians. Even though they acquire them, even though we went through this in the 90s, the 2000s are turning into sort of the same thing with a little different twist to it. So the hospitals will acquire the physicians and oftentimes try to run them like hospitals. The physician staff, generally when they get onboarded, receive system-related benefits. Those are usually more expensive than the private practice benefits. Many times when you look at the P&L for the physicians after they're acquired, there's overhead allocations that confuse the physicians, that don't make sense to them based on their private cash-based accounting and P&L. The physicians are acquired, and oftentimes they're not engaged, nor are they asked to engage. Costs generally increase. The community can be damaged by lack of competition in the area. And then there's a lack of understanding in many regards about the entrepreneurial nature of physicians, and the hospitals don't quite get the culture of the physicians. The unintended consequences, therefore, end up being no alignment, maybe poor management at the system level for those who are running the employed model, no understanding of the physician dynamic in the service line as it applies to ambulatory, an increased subsidy for the outpatient service line, and a lack of understanding that the new paradigms, and I'm sorry to use a trite business word, the new models that are coming down the road are less about making widgets and keeping heads in beds. They're more about quality outcomes and lower cost. So the hospitals obviously align. Theoretically, they're looking to improve the bottom line, recruit and retain physicians, medical staff relations, to grow their bench in particular service lines, prepare for further alignment, nail down their primary care referral base, and service line stabilization. This is a really simple, so forgive me, but I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. It's just a basic P&L on slide 11 that shows the private practice versus the employed model. As you can see, on the private practice, we'll say Dr. X has $100 in revenue, he pays out 50 in expenses, and he then nets out 50. He's running about a 50% overhead. I'm going to call this Dr. X the cardiologist. And what you'll notice in the employed model on the right-hand side, once Dr. X cardiologist becomes employed, the hospital system has stripped out his ancillary. His expenses have now gone up because he's getting a pro rata share of IT. He's getting a pro rata share of the of the employee benefits costs that are now increased. He'll get a pro rata share of legal and some other things thrown in. And then he'll either be guaranteed a salary that was similar to what he made before joining, or let's just say he has an RVU model. And so you can see in this math, the hospital right off the bat is $30 upside down. So the drivers on the private practice side are about the same, except that they're cash accounting versus accrual accounting. And you look at the left-hand column and the right-hand column, old versus new. basically, it's a little bit of an absurd model, but I think it shows kind of numerically what the downward pressures are that exist for private practice physicians. So on the old model, you can see that the physician generated, as you drop through the $100 in revenue, take out the expenses, you drop through the profit of $43. We'll just say this is a two-partner practice and they split that money evenly. So let's say that you had the perfect storm. The next year you got a cut in your Medicare of 10%, or excuse me, 20%. Your private payers were cut because their fee schedule is tied to Medicare, so they dropped 20%. And again, I know this has to do with volumes and patient mix and all that, but so let's say the revenue dropped to $80 and your cost went up 10%. Those doctors are now splitting $17 versus $43. And again, the math is very simple. It's a simple model. It doesn't take every variable into account, but I'm trying with this to paint a picture of what the physicians are going through and will continue to go through. So physicians align, obviously, for improved financial stability, hopefully increased compensation, shared risk on the med-mal, lifestyle improvements, maybe trying to cut back on call and share call with someone else on the service line, infrastructure development, administrative hassles are offloaded onto the hospital, practice style shift, variances to the hospital, recruit and retain, and succession strategy. So the changes for the physicians, we'll look at this in terms of the unintended consequences. Again, as with the hospital, if the cultures don't match and things don't work between the two, you just can't get them to align. And I'm an advocate of pre-merger or pre-deal discussions about culture and beliefs to find out if there really will be a cultural fit, if there really will be a clinical fit. System management, sometimes you'll get system managers who, again, don't understand the physician enterprise. They understand the hospital enterprise, and it's difficult for them in some regards to make a transition. And obviously that doesn't happen everywhere and all the time, but it happens in many instances. Staff gets irritated because they lose contact with the physician, or they no longer like the hours, or they don't like the hospital. There's a lack of control with the physicians because they cede a great deal of control over to the hospital system. And for many physicians I've worked with, that's a real challenge. Roadblocks to basics, and by that, I would define that as ordering pencils, paper clips, staplers, getting a PC, getting IT to come down and help me fix my computer. We talked about the no understanding of the service line. Physicians don't fit in, which I think is culture and alignment. And the MDs aren't necessarily encouraged to be entrepreneurial. And most of the physicians I know love to think about how to grow their business and think outside the box. So obviously that stifling can breed some resentment. And as with all of this, and this will be a touchstone throughout whatever models roll or evolve into the future, a lot of this is predicated on a good, strong IT backbone. And the thing you find, especially as you start to integrate practices, is multiple different systems and commitments are made that when the deals are done, and many times that the physicians can keep their system if they love it, and then the hospital has to then manage multiple different IT structures. So you get disaggregated data, maybe you get no good data at all, poor IT structure, systems that don't talk. There may be a slight cut in IT investment, although I would suggest to you that's probably increasing now. Data is going to be key in all of these things as we move forward. And so limited access to good data, no data sharing, mining, or managing of data. So the future state. So where we are right now is we've looked at kind of the hobgoblin of what, well, the good and the bad of what can happen with the employed model and as physicians are looking to be employed. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now let's talk a little bit about really the bottom line. So at the bottom of this slide, hospitals and provider interest will be increasingly at odds and less aligned. Excuse me. Hospitals must embrace physicians. And I think that's a two-way street. And that needs to go both ways, where the physicians are not considered widget makers, where they are considered valued team members who have input in their specialties and bring a lot of value to the table. So in the 90s, just a brief history lesson, and I hope you'll indulge me because I'm not totally sure of where people are in terms of their administrative careers here. So in the 90s, hospitals really focused on buying and building their referral network, PCPs. Capitation drove a lot of this. Many instances, physicians' salaries were guaranteed. There were few productivity requirements that were baked into either comp plans or expectations of the physicians, and little or no productivity-based incentive plans. Hospitals didn't partner with physicians necessarily, and by that I mean a continuity of partnership, working together to make decisions. Instead, in many instances, the mindset was, we purchase your practice, now go do what we want you to do. Obviously, physicians then resented when hospitals came in and tried to cut costs. So after the 90s, there was a little bit of an explosion and divestiture of many employed practices. And now what you're getting into is the purchase of practices at an FMV rate. Very little is now being baked into goodwill. Physician productivity is a key component in many compensation models. Hospitals and physicians in some regards are striving to form truer partnerships that focus on quality, patient care delivery services, cost-effective management. Non-employment models now, and this is one of the things that I think is key moving forward, non-employment models like professional services agreements are viable alternatives and in many instances are preferred. Hospitals realize value proposition by acquiring the ancillaries of many specialty practice service lines. Very little intangible value is being paid to physicians under the current agreements. A fair market value and possibly sign-on retention. We talked about fair market value earlier. And this is all with an eye, theoretically, to ACO-related stuff, or what I would put kind of more generically, the managing of the quality of care continuum, whether you call it an ACO or a PCMH. I put this out here just to give more of an indication about alignment. When you think about alignment, in many instances, people look at it as employment. And what I've tried to do here is on the top line, work from left to right on your screen, showing kind of the less integrated, kind of medium integration and fully integrated. And then on the bottom, the arrow going left to right shows basically physician control all the way over to maybe less physician control. And I would suggest to you that while many hospitals are still employing physicians and are looking to employ physicians and have built strategies around that, I would suggest to you that some are also looking at the bottom line and really contemplating other alignment modalities, like a co-management agreement or a professional services agreement, where they don't have to employ the physician, physicians retain their autonomy, and they develop that relationship and still work on quality of care. So as I said, many physicians perceive alignment as synonymous with employment. Employment's not the only option. Within each type of integration or integrated model we talked about above, there are also nuances and caveats. And I think the key message to that is there is always more than one way to skin a cat. There's always more than one way to approach this to find a relationship that works where you get to what I think will be the ultimate goal of delivering higher quality care at a lower cost. And frankly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, this is where you all will really come into play too, because the onus of a piece of this at least will be the delivery of operational, i.e. financial savings on the ambulatory outpatient side. So here's a little more drill down, and I won't stay on the slide for too long. But your limited integration, call stipends, directorships, moderate, the service line management, MSO type deals, JVs, co-management, and then full integration, obviously employment or employment light. PSA is still obviously just an agreement where the physician provides services to the system. One of the key caveats to all of this stuff is regardless of what the deal looks like, the deals all need to be priced out at a fair market value to pass muster. Even if it's a medical directorship, there has to be an accounting, it has to be structured with a deliverable, with an accounting of what transpires and a delivered result. It cannot just be that I'm going to hire this medical director on board, we're going to pay him $1,000 an hour to help us. That's a little too nebulous and would probably raise the ire of any federal regulator who might look at it. So trends surveyed healthcare leaders, how does this align with where you are? These are 3 top motivating questions that were asked to a sample size of 279 folks. The multi-response, so obviously more than one, but many obviously are looking at creating coordinated physician buy-in to quality and safety initiatives, stronger coverage for strategic service lines, and keeping physicians on board. On this slide, the key is alignment is occurring in a variety of ways, and that not only impacts the care delivery model, but also operational factors such as physician comp. And as I get further in the conversation, we'll look a little bit into how physician comp is going to be impacted by the switch towards quality. So on alignment, clinical integration, people look at these as all of these alignment modalities and opportunities kind of black and white in many instances. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, many of these just have slightly different twists to them. I would define for purposes of today, clinical integration essentially is providers working together across multiple entities to share clinical data and greatest care possible for patients, establishing best practices and processes in patient care and measurable outcomes. And the key component, again, is and it always comes back to this, is a robust and integrated technology infrastructure. And in my opinion, even if the tech isn't integrated in a classical sense, my feeling is that as long as the systems, let's just say you're integrated, you have physicians who are employed, and then you have outreach to a service line you need in the community. And so as long as the systems can talk and exchange data meaningfully, that will help you get towards an integrated and being able to, an integrated network being able to manage that care. So here, as you all know, this is just a depiction of kind of the classic typical model of you've got a bunch of independent physicians running around multiple hospitals, and they're all over the place. You have siloed care. In many instances, you have many tests being run, similar or the same tests, on people in different physician practices. For instance, you might go in and get your MRI at your orthopedic doctor's office. He may refer you to someone else subspecial out to do a CT scan. And I have been in situations where both of those studies have been inconclusive. And so the key, obviously, is that what you're trying to do is cull out of the system those duplicative processes, those duplicative tests. And regardless of where you stand on the Affordable Care Act and the new health care that's being tied in with that, the reality is, and we all know this, anyone who's been in the business very long knows that there is a lot of redundancy, there is a lot of overkill in the delivery of care. And it makes all the sense in the world to cull that out of the delivery. And again, you will be on the front line of helping to drive those efficiencies within your practices. So ideally, when you pull this off and you've reached the far end of the spectrum and you've hit the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, patients and communities are going to have access to higher quality, coordinated, and comprehensive care. Physicians will have greater financial incentives tied into the delivery of that care. It's an opportunity to drive healthcare quality and value, opportunity to engage the hospital, opportunity to engage in hospital and physician alignment. Hospitals hopefully will be able to cut costs, deliver improved patient-centric care, and it's an opportunity to engage in hospital physician alignment. Now that would be, hospital physician, the other one's physician in hospital, excuse me. So I wanted to take the blinders off for 1 second because I think the thing that I struggle with, and I was putting a presentation together for a large pharma company, and I got to thinking about how the presentation was going to go with regard to all of the acronyms that are out there right now. And I truly believe that regardless of the noise that surrounds the acronyms and all the definitions that go along with it, I really get a sense that there are shared ideals there that essentially boil down to quality care delivered in a repeatable manner to repeatable processes with competitive pricing and efficient delivery of that care. And I'll give you a for instance on that, just so people can wrap their heads around it a little better. So congestive heart failure, what you might do is work on a congestive heart failure program and look at baselining your time-based cost accounting of the process in the clinic to get that patient through, and what it actually costs the clinic to do that by way of all the components within that process. And then looking at the clinical delivery of that care and figuring out how to deliver that in a repeatable manner so that the physicians in your practice, let's say you're a 10-doctor cardiology practice in a hospital system, so the physicians will define what their care process is for that congestive heart failure patient. And then what you'll do is you'll link those two together and figure out how you can bleed those costs out. Maybe bleed's not a good word for that. How you can drive those costs out of the delivery of congestive heart failure. So what you'll end up doing is you'll deliver it more efficient, deliver congestive heart failure care more efficiently, and you'll save money there. You'll have repeatable outcomes, and the patients will be managed in a more cohesive manner. So anyway, that's a little tangential, and forgive me. So the ACO, again, shared savings, shared downside risk, PCMH, patient-centric management of care, and the clinically integrated network, it's integrated delivery of care via affiliation of specialists. And so this is kind of how, again, I'm a visual guy, so this is how I boiled that down, is to be able to see where these things overlap is high quality, low cost. So alignment reimbursement. I'm sorry that paradigm ended in there. I'm getting tired of seeing paradigm thrown about. So we'll call it the reimbursement model, and models are changing. There will be less focus on productivity, although that will need to necessarily be baked into future compensation plans. Shared savings, risk sharing, bundling of payments. So again, let's go to congestive heart failure as my fallback. Let's say that you will be paid $1,000 for that. If you go over that $1,000, then you eat the cost or the downside on that $1,000 for the payment of that modality. So compensation, these are components with regard to reimbursement. Evidence-based results, reduced cost, quality of care, patient sat, and chronic care management. Reimbursement models, how they're changing, less on productivity, shared saving, risk, quality collaboratives, bundle payments, as we discussed on the earlier slide. I've already covered bullet number 1 a couple times, so I'm going to jump over that. Let's look a little bit at the evolution of the physician compensation. Physician compensation obviously is going to play a huge role in how this delivery moves itself forward. So in the 90s, high guarantees, no productivity, which we talked about, no productivity expected, significant benefit packages. Hospitals got upside down really fast when the physicians no longer necessarily had a dog in the fight with regard to running an efficient private practice. In other words, their income wasn't predicated on one drop through to the bottom line. In the 2000s, strong focus on productivity, mainly based on work RVUs. Limited performance incentives outside of the productivity component. Decent benefits package, but maybe a shift into pensions and the retirement. In the 2010s and onward in the decade, you have continued focus on productivity, although that will change as we discussed. Significant focus on inclusion of performance incentives outside of productivity. Less on the guarantee side. Of course, that is all predicated on where in the country you live and your demand for physicians. Reasonable benefit package, and some questions with regard to what the future does look like. And let me throw a little caveat in there as we move along too. Much of this discussion, as they say, healthcare is local. Much of it is predicated on what your situation is, where you are, where you live. I've got clients out west in very rural settings, and their approach to alignment is going to be far different than if I was working a 750 physician or 750 provider practice in the Mid-Atlantic region. Maybe their draw of physicians is much harder. Maybe they are not into acquiring, but they're more into aligning and getting their integrated network that way. So that's a sort of an overall caveat to the presentation generally. I'm going to take a second also to ask that if you all have any questions, please feel free to key those in. I believe you key them into the GoToMeeting space there. So the kind of standard model back in the day, salary, possible production incentive payment equals comp. Then you got into work RVUs and some sort of conversion factor translated into compensation. And the interesting component with a lot of these too is that the compensation to physicians is not predicated on the financial stability of the practice. And so then some of this gets into, is the revenue cycle coming through and collecting everything they should be collecting? Because I'm paying this doctor a lot of money, and we should not be leaving anything on the table. So this is, and I'll talk a little bit later about how this is sort of a multi-pronged and really a systemic thing. So then what you're getting into now is many different models. You get some work RVUs. You'll have a conversion factor. Many times that's steps based on the number of RVUs. So you might have 1,000, then you'll hit X, 2,000, you'll hit Y, etc. And now non-production incentives are being baked in to the total compensation package. And one of the cautionary tales is I'm not a lawyer, so understand that going forward. I will tell you that the non-production incentives also have to be defendable under a fair market value assessment. So you can't just bake in an extra $300,000 or $400,000 for Dr. X on quality because A, that will probably fall outside of any fair market and reasonableness standard metric that anyone uses. But also, these plans have to be built, these plans being the production incentives, have to be built and measured, monitored, and managed. So if you have a pool of money, the physicians have to hit certain guidelines to get into that pool of money for their compensation. Here are some of the quality measures that you may see baked into compensation plans moving forward, or you may even have baked into your plans currently. So now I wanted to get into the role really that you all will play in moving this forward. When I spoke earlier about the management of the practices, I mean, you all are the folks who manage the top line, the top line, both revenue in terms of bringing it in, and the P&L in terms of the dollars flowing out the door. And so, my feeling is, as an administrator and a senior executive, days gone by, is you all need to be built into this process and also provide feedback and input on how things move forward. So as I look at this, I'm looking at this as really a system where the strategy, so this is, and I will say this is going to be basically based on an employed model. So the strategy really is kind of coming from the system, and I pray that it's involved some of the employed physicians on board helping define what that strategy is for the ambulatory side. It involves the providers being productive, being engaged. It involves strong operations, and obviously the delivery of quality as an output to that. So regardless of how you're affiliated, the strategy needs to be, for the ambulatory enterprise, needs to be well structured and managed versus just sort of a swag at, well, this seems like the thing to do and it's the popular vernacular, so let's throw that out there. The ambulatory side, and this is becoming more and more prevalent, impacts the entire system, both in and outpatient. So physicians are going to drive a lot of what happens as hospitals strive to keep heads out of beds and get rewarded for lack of readmissions, etc. So the ambulatory clinics are really going to need to be efficient and step up to this new way of thinking. And heretofore, I would suggest to you that what has happened historically is, again, physicians are the widget makers. We now own you. We need you to do this, that, and the other thing. The hospital system strategy must or should align with the ambulatory side so they can have symbiosis. It can't be a closed system. This needs to have input from providers, ops, revenue, and you need to review and amend that. Someone needs to own that strategy and manage that. I have seen countless number of cases where I've seen both good and bad strategies, and actually even really, really good ones, where they got contemplated, developed, put into a binder, and then put on a shelf and had about an inch of dust by the time I saw them. And the problem is, this one most recently was a great strategy. No one babysat that. No one owned it. Some people look at this pyramid and suggest to you that strategy should be the foundation. I actually, again, as a former practitioner in the trenches, I think sound operations is essential to moving this thing forward. The strategy needs to contemplate all of these things from the top down, and I welcome any discussion anyone wants to have with that. But I've seen too many cases, and I'm sure you all in your careers have experienced cases where the clinic piece on the operations side, and I don't mean on the clinical delivery of care side, but on the operations side, is kind of all over the place, inefficient, we're plugging holes, we're not managing proactively, we're putting out fires, and that's no way to run a practice. So again, for the strategy, it starts with vision of where the system wants to go or should go. You boil that down into the component pieces and hopefully empower the ambulatory side to deliver on those pieces. So you will get assigned pieces to work on. Contemplate how to work with the physician partners, whether they're employed, whether we have a joint venture with them, whether they're community physicians, and we just want to align to deliver better care in our community. Critical strategic steps include assessing your needs. Obviously, you all should know these things by now. Assessing the needs is develop proactive strategy, prioritize, and obviously nail the high need stuff first. Ensure economic implications of any plan are aligned and considered up front. And again, I would suggest to you that involves and entails input from y'all in the trenches to give that kind of feedback to make sure that the pro forma, when it's contemplated, is done so as rigorously as possible. So the questions are, does your system have a defined strategy for the employed enterprise? And does that match up with the greater system strategy? Has that been elucidated down to the operators? And by that I mean, so they pass it down to the administrators or the VPs. The VPs then give it to their directors or whomever. Do the people who are in the trenches running the day-to-day, do they know what the strategy is? Do they know what their expectations are? Is the strategy visited with frequency, defined interval and frequency? We talked about who owns it. That strategy obviously contemplates, do we hire more physicians? And when we're going through that hiring process, are we talking to our employed guys and gals in the trenches, asking for their input and feedback on who we're going to hire? I have seen instances where a system was short of OB-GYN physicians. They decided they were going to add one to the mix. They plunked that physician into the mix, and the other physician who was delivering OB-GYN services really did not appreciate the newly added physician. They got to the point that they were so rancorous, they almost put tape down the middle of the office to split up and segment the office so they didn't have to deal with each other. So that long story to tell you this, I hope that the ambulatory side has a seat at the table in discussing manpower issues for providers and what those fits are, how the searches go, and things of that nature. The strategy should obviously be malleable and change as the climate allows and requires. So when I talk about physician engagement, here is just a vanilla look at what I'm talking about. I'm a big advocate, as you probably already know, of a physician at the table. And the physician, an administrator or VP of physician services or someone should liaise from the employed model up to the executive management team. And whether it's the VP or an executive committee or what have you, this physician should serve the role of conveying what the physicians in the trenches are feeling. And what I like about this dyad model is it empowers physicians. You know, again, even though physicians may be more empowered now than they were in the 90s, I think if you talk to many physicians, and I can't give you a percentage, but I know a few, they still feel like they're widget makers and that they're remote and their input is not appreciated. And so what I'd like to see happen is a committee that works in the ambulatory side, the owned model, that has certain defined structural components. So they engage physicians to provide input. They help define the quality measures, because I think after all, the clinicians should probably help drive that. They perform physician-to-physician performance issues, like a physician advisory committee. And by that I mean, occasionally you might have a difficult physician, one that needs some discussion on certain topics. And for an administrator to do that, sometimes that gets to be or can be career limiting, let's say. And it's easier for physicians, and I think they appreciate it more, when they get input and feedback from fellow physicians. As I mentioned before, the committee also, I think, should have some say on input on providing providers, hiring, and pro forma discussion on same. So we talked a little bit about the subsidy. In this, I went over it in an earlier slide. I'll touch on it again. So how much is losing too much? I know MGMA puts data out that's benchmarked and all that good stuff. And the question really is this: how many systems are accurately measuring and valuing how much downstream revenue flows into their systems from the ambulatory side? I would suggest to you, at least, and this is going to be conservative, I bet at least 75% don't measure that in any meaningful way, shape, or form. And so I think that before there's an argument about the subsidy and how bad we're losing money on cardiology or orthopedics, a counter argument to that is, well, what's the downstream revenue? And how much extra cost have you baked into what was previously a very lean operational machine, where I now have an overinflated pro rata share of HR. I now have the overinflated IT component. I now have the overinflated legal component. Those are real legitimate discussions that I think balance the table a little better when you're having an intellectual debate about subsidies and the value of the subsidies. I think that moving forward, it's essential for the ambulatory side to make sure they've got the right ship, so that they're not that ship from slide 2 or 3 that's underwater and failing to see the light of day on the top of the sea. I think that there needs to be rigorous look at staffing, management span of control, right person for the right job. Do we have an MA trying to perform RN work? I certainly hope not. Again, physician comp relative to benchmarks, revenue cycle relative to some best-in-class standard. Are we collecting all the money that is due to us legitimately, contractually, that is owed to us based on the services we've provided? Maximizing patient demand and flow, optimizing physicians' schedules to the best of their ability to deliver quality care. And some of you are probably looking at right now an issue with your EMR. And my physician can only see 10 patients a day because of his EMR or whatever. I would suggest to you a plan needs to be placed to both fix the EMR piece and get the physician seeing more patients, because I have seen instances where an EMR implementation can be a crutch, and it really masks some underlying issues. And I will tell you, the first EMR that I put in 15 years ago, my physicians were exceeding their current visits within 3.5 to 4 months. So I know it can happen. So where are the physicians on the engagement continuum? Are they valued contributors or widget makers? Sorry, I'm moving quick because I know we have a 3 o'clock end time. The subsidy we discussed. And regardless of the system side, are the physicians engaged? I've worked with a system recently that was 6 physicians. And it becomes a question of, are we going to give them input? If we're big or small, we still need to give them input and a seat at the table. And honestly, you all know this. That gives them buy-in. That will empower them and get them on board in whatever you do moving forward. So as you saw before, here's my subsidy, and we talked through that. Clinics require good, fundamentally sound management. I will tell you that in many deals that I've seen, physicians will, in many instances, bring staff members over to the employment model who maybe are not fundamentally sound on their management skills. And a lot of times, that's really a result of no investment in the human capital of that person. I've seen many people hired who were hired at I'll just say a discount rate. And that really underserves what we do in the trenches on a daily basis. I think that many systems, and not all obviously, and many practices, though not all obviously, underinvest in that piece of the organization. And I think you can prove time and again that a sound investment would deliver a great ROI. Investing in your people and giving them the tools to succeed, it will make your jobs easier, certainly, but it will also help deliver better operational performance. You'll need this operational performance, you'll need these efficiencies when the rubber hits the road and that alphabet soup of acronyms comes to fruition. And it's on its way. It's already starting to roll out in dribs and drabs. So low-cost, high-quality care, there's just urgency to get the ambulatory side in line. It's just that simple. Administrators, obviously, well, maybe not obviously. My opinion is administrators should minimally really have a facile understanding of the specialty service line they're delivering. And I'll tell you why that is. Because my sense is if you can talk the talk, even if you're not a clinician, with your physicians and let them know that you understand orthopedics or cardiology and that you kind of get it, that's going to engender trust in some regards. It's also going to help you understand what they're going through, and it's going to help you deliver more tools to the physicians to get done what they need done. I also think, quite frankly, it helps you look at other modalities. You could do some pro formas, deliver those to the physicians, and they can see if the modality is efficacious. If so, then it's a win-win. I think managers, administrators need to have the tools, defined authority to make decisions and not be micromanaged. I think they need to have a dashboard. I've thrown out a very busy dashboard here just to give you a sense of where I am. It could be whatever you want. This is just Anywhere USA. You're measuring the current month versus the prior year month, and then prior year to date versus current year to date. You can put in whatever you want. And I think that, too, delivering these types of tools to physicians goes a lot further than delivering an 85-page P&L where they will get lost in the noise, unless, of course, that's your goal. Physicians, I have found, react much better to just seeing some graphical depictions of what the numbers are telling us and where we're outliers, where we're better, where we're worse, what we're doing to remedy those things where we're deficient. The budgets that y'all get on the ambulatory side, I think they need to be considered very carefully. I have seen several budgets where you take X and you divide by 12. I don't think that's necessarily the best approach. I talked about senior management span of control. I think that the site management, your day-to-day person should manage the patient throughput, rev cycle if you don't have a CBO or outsourced billing, day-to-day staffing, operational firefighting. My opinion, frankly, I don't think the MBA is a must. I think aptitude and a desire carries as much weight as an MBA. And just point of fact, I do have an MBA, so I'll just throw that out there. Scheduling and patient flow, again, this should be a no-brainer. Defined clinic times, consistency in that, so staff understands, physician understand, defined patient contact, capturing of charges in AR, maybe allow some massaging of schedules with variability predicated on a discussion, delineated plan of how the schedules are built. I just threw this out here, and I won't rest on this for too long. But again, we'll just say AR, some benchmarks for AR, looking at certain pieces that I can deliver that show net charges collections, point of service collections, back-end collections, etc., and then delivering something simple as this to show our gains and losses about where we thought we were going to be. And then where we are now is, again, and hopefully, I actually made it through all the information. And I'm a little surprised because I thought with the volume it was going to get a little chaotic. But really, for you all, what this is going to boil down to is operational efficiency in the delivery of the ambulatory side or the private practice side, because that is coming into play. Clinicians who are delivering high-quality care, repeatable outcomes, and management of that care, and then a combination of those two component pieces. That's what's coming down the road. It's going to be efficient management of the care at low cost. And so regardless of what piece of the alphabet soup you take away, regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, I'm kind of the mind you need to be an open-headed big thinker about all of those prospects. Whether we hire more physicians, whether we just align with the physicians who are available in the community, really give that good thought. And I guess I would caution, don't necessarily think that hiring is the way to build the model. It may not be. But again, that's local and predicated on your community needs and demands. So the question is, for folks running the clinics now, whether you're VP level, director level, or day-to-day operational, are you ready for this? Have you maximized your employed model, whether it's from the system of the ambulatory practice, whether it's check-in, check-out, throughput of patients, use of clinicians to their full scope of practice, maybe not deploying 8 RNs, an RN for each doctor in a regular clinic day. Those types of thought processes really need to come into play. And frankly, when you put those on the table, there may be political pushback with some of those, because you may occasionally have a physician who is enamored with the RN that he's had on staff for 20 years, and how dare you ask that he separate from her or put her in a different clinical role. So it's easy for me to talk about these things. I think, honestly, when the rubber meets the road, and I've had these conversations too, that there may be political challenges. But ultimately, you've got to get to that controlled, managed P&L state. I am going to go over slide 57. You will have that in the future. And the takeaways are really these. Value-based medicine's coming. Whether you like the Affordable Care Act or you don't like it, you can argue that as long as you want. But it's coming in some way, shape, or form. And honestly, reforming or changing what we're doing is not necessarily a bad thing. You can argue the depth at some of those reforms, and I get that. But honestly, delivering lower cost care is essential. Many systems underinvest in the operational infrastructure. If you're trying to hire an RN because you need an RN to do a certain job, I would make that argument, and I would try to back it up with data about what benefit you're going to have if you add that expanded bandwidth and capacity. Risk and challenges exist, but doing nothing at all and sitting back is obviously going to be a problem down the road. Federal and commercial payers have obviously been supporting the new models via programs and incentives. I apologize. So systems really need to have a contemplated, defined, deployed strategic plan for the physician model that ensures alignments in how the care is done. So it's handoff from the clinic to the inpatient. It's handoff after a surgery back to the outpatient. Those types of things and integrated pieces need to come to fruition. Physicians have to be engaged, and they need to drive care and operational efficiencies into the clinics. And by engaged, too, I will say that my definition of engagement is not the physician who just wants to do it because. It needs to be a physician who's passionate about making a change for the better. And honestly, a guy or a gal who, as we like to say, who gets it, someone who understands completely what's going on, understands the dynamic, is plugged into the machinations in Washington. So now what? To move forward in the brave new world, obviously, again, and hate to beat it into the ground, but this is where we are, and it is what it is. Reduced cost, increased quality. For systems and practices, systems need to rigorously assess, and their employed models need to rigorously assess comp structures, ops structures, staffing cost alignment, rev cycle ops. The time is now. The future is almost here. It's starting to get here in dribs and drabs. So I have a couple of questions, and I think they've been addressed, and if not, I'm going to elaborate on them a little bit. And if anyone has any other questions that didn't get covered or they haven't pinged on GoToMeeting and they want to catch up, please just send me an email. Let me know. We can sidebar at some other time, and I'm delighted to do that. I've been asked if the hospital constantly says they're losing money on the physicians, but the numbers don't add up. And basically that speaks to the subsidy model again, and that speaks to really defining what that subsidy means and those component parts that go into the subsidy. So just for the sake of beating a dead horse, I would elaborate that looking at the physician subsidy is more than looking at what the P&L shows you as the loss. It's looking at what the hospital is capturing. It's looking at the costs that are baked into the P&L that were not previously, all those component parts. The question is, what do I think will happen with the kind of typical employed model? I will tell you, actually I love this question. I will tell you that interestingly enough, I have seen, so when we talked about the alphabet soup, I have seen recently many large groups coming together to form their own integrated network. And many of those are in their genesis, they're in their kind of initial stages right now. But there is a move afoot for a lot of physicians to go, you know what, I'm just not into this employed model. I did it in the 90s, or you know what, I'm gun shy, I keep hearing horror stories. And many are looking at, or I'll say there are some out there who are looking at managing this thing together and doing an integrated network of multi-specialty clinics where they drive the quality, they define those measurements and metrics, they work on their own comp plans, and oh, by the way, we get to keep our autonomy. So the typical employed model, I still think you're going to see a shifting to physicians wanting to be employed because frankly, with the rules and regs that continue to be promulgated from DC, it's making life on practitioners, whether they're PAs, NPs, or physicians, it's making it really hard. And all the IT demands that are coming down the road, even though you've got some cloud access and things of that nature to help kind of mitigate some cost, there's cost baked into that. And life is becoming challenging to them. And I will tell you that, and I know it's challenging to you all too, but I'll tell you that physicians I talk to almost to a man, unless they're near retirement age, say, you know, Jeff, I just want to practice medicine. I just want to deliver care. I don't care about this. So the shorter answer to that is I still see acquisition, and I also see a segment moving towards kind of doing it on their own, going it alone, and managing this alone. Next question is, how will the employed model evolve under population health methodology in the future? I think more than the model evolving is going to be the integration involvement, right? So I see this as you might have a mixed bag of employed physicians and some integrated community docs. Let's say that I'm small. I've got 20 employed primary care docs, but I just can't bring myself to bring urology, cardiology, ortho on board. So I've aligned with them, and you can still manage patient population, demographic population, and information that way. You don't have to be employed to do this. Keep in mind the caveat, as I said earlier, is that what's going to need to happen is you're going to have a very robust IT structure, data inputs that are clean. You know, I know some EMRs, you have abstracting issues. People don't key in the right data. They put the whatever it may be, or they've scanned a document from the old medical record. It got sideways. No one can read it, etc. Those pieces have to go away or be tamped down as large as possible, or tamped down into a small bucket. Because to do this thing and do it right in the population health environment, again, wherever you are in the alphabet soup model, the pop health is going to require robust data that's managed so that you can manage what the care continuum looks like. So if I've got 5 measurements, and again, I'll beat up on congestive heart failure. If I've got 5 measurements for CHF, I need to be able to report out on those and measure those. So if each one is a 1 through 10, I need to be able to say, oh, we hit 9 on that. Oh, we hit 2 on that one. That has to happen to do pop health. So I think with that, I think we are done for the day. I really appreciate your time. I know there was a lot of material. I wanted to make sure I covered it as well as I could and be as comprehensive as I could. I will tell you that there is no magic bullet to any of this. It requires you all to think, and I will use another trite business analogy, to think outside the box. It requires you all to look at this differently, to get your head out of your day-to-day model and see what's going on around you. That will be essential moving forward to help align high-quality care at a low cost. And I thank you. I really do appreciate it. I know your time is very valuable, so thank you very much.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you for an excellent presentation. For everyone who has attended, thank you so much for your participation. Jeff's contact information is on the screen, so if you do need to reach out to him, please feel free to do so. You will receive a recording of the presentation, and that should be emailed to you within the next 24 hours. Thank you again for attending. Please check back soon at www.cokergroup.com for details on our next Coffee with Coker on April 17th. Everyone have a great day.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.